So I wanted to talk about confusing Japanese and Mandarin Chinese. So I have some notes for this video you can check out. And so I began studying Japanese when I was 13, I think. And then I started learning Mandarin Chinese in my mid-20s. So I didn't learn these two languages from the beginning at the same time. However, I was studying them continually, and I found that I had the most difficult time switching back and forth, in particular at the supermarket. And what do I mean by that? My friend Achi, who is Japanese, comes to visit me every fall in Philadelphia here for about 2 weeks, and he's been doing this since 2014. And also, my wife speaks Mandarin Chinese. So I remember a few years back, we all went to the supermarket together. And so I was naturally speaking to my friend Achi in Japanese, and I was switching to speaking Mandarin Chinese to my wife Kelly. And so I had to switch back and forth between these two languages. And I found that it was a bit difficult. I found that if I got into the mode of speaking Japanese and then I immediately switched over to say something to Kelly, the initial impulse was to speak in Japanese. And it kind of took a little bit of an effort in my mind to say, okay, no, I'm speaking to Kelly now. I need to switch over to Mandarin to speak to her so she can understand me. And then the same thing, switching back to talking to Achi in Japanese later. If I happen to be speaking in Mandarin for a little while, and then I wanted to say something immediately to Achi, that impulse was to speak in Mandarin, and I had to kind of correct it and say, okay, now it's time to speak in Japanese. I remember more recently, a few months ago, I was watching a YouTube video with a Japanese person I made. It was a kind of a vlog, and I was really into it. I was really focused on what he was saying, and I really got into the video to the point that kind of my mind state also entered this like Japanese mode. And near the end of the video, Kelly came up to me and she said something, and I just immediately responded to her without even pausing. And after I said what I said, in my mind I thought, wait, I was just really into this Japanese video and I didn't pause at all when I spoke to Kelly. So did I actually speak Mandarin to her, or did I accidentally speak Japanese? And so I had to replay in my mind what I had just said to her. And I was like, okay, yeah, I did speak Mandarin Chinese to her. I didn't mess that up. So yeah, I feel like which language you use is based on either a feeling that you evoke or that you're in, or it could be the mental state that you find yourself in. And whichever language feels most comfortable for that feeling or that mental state, that's the language that comes out. And so I've noticed this in other people too. I remember back in college, my suite mate, so she wasn't my roommate, but she was in my suite. There were 4 rooms next to each other, and we shared like a living room and a kitchen. And so I had a Chinese suite mate named Seashell. And I remember I was in her room one day and she was on the computer doing something, and we were talking back and forth. And she turned to me and she spoke to me in Mandarin Chinese, which at that time I didn't know any Mandarin and I hadn't studied it at all, and we had never spoken to each other in Mandarin. And she was like, wow, I can't believe I just did that. I've never spoken Mandarin to a non-Chinese person like that. And I realized what must have happened was that in that moment, maybe she was distracted by the computer a little bit, but in that moment, we entered this kind of feeling that she must have had with other Chinese people in her life. And so the most natural language to use based on that feeling was Mandarin Chinese. And that's why she spoke to me in Mandarin, even though we never spoken Mandarin before. Another example is my actual roommate, Gautam, who is Indian, and he spoke to me in an Indian language. I should ask them. I don't know if it was Hindi, Gujarati, or Marathi, but he spoke to me in the language and was like, "Wow, I can't believe I did that." Um, he thought he thought it was so crazy that he would speak to me in Indian language because at our college there weren't that many Indian students, and in our dorm he was the only Indian student. So in our dorm he only spoke English. He only spoke English to me. But I guess again in that moment he must have felt like that was the setting to speak whatever language, whatever Indian language it was. So I think there's also another factor, which is the kind of energy or a vibe that you're embodying. Because 2 summers ago, I went to Holland with my friend Achi, and I noticed that a lot of people there spoke to me in Dutch. And I don't know, maybe I look Dutch. I'm not really sure what a Dutch person looks like. But I remember we were waiting for the tram, and there's this tram there, and we got on. But the tram driver came and he started talking to me like 100 miles a minute in Dutch. I was like, wait, I can't speak Dutch that well. I did study a little bit on the flight, but I don't understand what you're saying. And he switched to English. But it was interesting that he spoke to me first in Dutch, even though we were in a tourist area. So I know there are a lot of tourists and non-Dutch people in that area. But for whatever reason, he thought that I spoke Dutch. Another example was that I was riding the tram, and an older man came up to me and started asking me about like what the next stop was in Dutch. He asked me, what the next stop was going to be, and I guess he wanted to know where to get off. And yeah, I did actually respond to him in Dutch, but again, I'm American, and Dutch is not my native language. I did study a little bit, but I found it interesting that he spoke to me first in Dutch, especially in that tourist area. Later on, we were in a tourist area. My friend Achi and we wanted to go to a restaurant, and we were in a line, and there were two or three groups ahead of us, and the hostess spoke to each one of them in English. But when it was finally my turn to get to the front of the line, instead of speaking to me in English, she started speaking to me in Dutch, even though she had spoken to everyone else in English. So I found that very strange, and I wonder if maybe in some way I was able to embody kind of the energy of a Dutch person, so it felt like it was natural for me to be there. Maybe I didn't have a kind of touristy vibe. Maybe it didn't seem as if I were there on vacation like I actually was. So yeah, I think that there is a mechanical component to confusing languages. You can train yourself to differentiate between speaking one language or the other language, and that's a skill that you can practice, you can get better at. So let's say if you're speaking Japanese and the Mandarin Chinese word comes to your mind, or you even speak the Mandarin Chinese word, you can say, okay, that was a mistake. Let me correct that to Japanese and move forward. And then the next time it'll get easier and easier to just stay in the Japanese mode and not let the Mandarin Chinese interfere with that. Likewise, you get better at identifying the feelings or mental states that you get into when you get into a particular language, especially if you use that language in a particular setting, like you only use it at work, or you only use it with your family, or I don't know, you only use it with your peers or your partner. In these cases, then the language really gets attached to a feeling or emotional state or a mental state that you have for that. And so again, that's a way that you can separate the mental states and begin to see, okay, usually I use this language for that feeling state or that mental state, but I can remember that when I want to speak that language and when I want to naturally be able to speak it, even outside of that mental state or feeling state, I can do that, and I can practice doing that and get better at it. So yeah, I hope that helps you and gives you some insight about language interference and being able to differentiate between languages when speaking and make sure that you're speaking the right language at the right time.